Hello and welcome to the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Big Lee, and this is part 3 of my Anglo-Zulu War Rorke's Drift battle report. So the first video a couple of weeks ago, I had discussed the background history, my terrain choices, and some changes to the rules to make the men who would be kings work with my 6mm Anglo-Zulu War collection, and for this particular scenario. And last week I started the game and the first major assaults occurred. The Zulus attacked the hospital and worked their way around the barricades. And we'd finally reached a point where the British decided they needed to abandon that end of the compound. So they've retreated behind the biscuit box line and around the redoubt outside the storehouse. And now fresh Zulu regiments have arrived and are in a position now to launch their assaults on the front of the site. I'm really looking forward to this half of the game because this is going to be the decider. Will the British hold out, or will history be changed, and will the Zulus win this time? So let's get on with the game, and again I really hope you enjoy it. So following the final repulse of the Zulus around the hospital, there's been a brief lull in the battle, enough time for Bromhead to decide to, Chard to bring order the men back into the other half of the site behind the biscuit boxes and around their redoubt, which has been built in the centre. This isn't, as the film would suggest, that they could hide a whole unit of troops in there for some surprise attack, but it was merely to give some height. There were two big piles of mealie bags in the yard anyway, because there was never enough room inside the store for all the mealie bags. So there's the two big piles, and basically they got fashioned into like a hollowed out pyramid so that a small squad of men could be in an elevated position to add their fire to the men at the barricades themselves. And that extra firepower trying to repulse the Zulus as they attacked proved quite significant. Meanwhile, down at this end, the rather battered Zulu units of the Anglo-Zulu have consolidated as per the rule that I introduced. So basically I added up all of the casualties and took off 3 bases. They'd already lost one, completely outright destroyed during the assault on the hospital, and they now consolidated those casualties, consolidated what men they had left, and that removed another 3 whole bases. And what we have now are 2 understrength units of this particular Zulu regiment, but they've had a breather, they've had a chance to consolidate, and they can get back in the fight, albeit at reduced effect. Meanwhile, the Ndoloko have managed to get themselves in a position where they can take advantage of the cover, light cover down here, and it's dark, remember, so the British can't necessarily see them, although that end of the battlefield is being illuminated by the burning hospital. And the Ulthuana regiment are continuing to move around. They're going to be moving around to attack the end when they finally get there. Like I say, I'm following the strategy of the historical battle as best I can, while letting the dice determine the outcome of the various attacks. So far, things have worked out fairly historical, although as we said, the British are taking slightly more casualties than they did in reality. That rule that I introduced about giving Surgeon Reynolds the chance to save men on a roll of a 6, so far I've not saved a single soul using that particular rule, so it has had no effect whatsoever on the game so far, and I've been diligently rolling away for every casualty, and I'll continue to do so. It may now have an effect. And as you can see, the British are now trapped inside, they've consolidated themselves inside one half of the site, and they've concentrated their firepower. This really is a last stand, but they're still armed to the teeth. They've got those Martini Henrys with the 18-inch bayonets on the end. They've still got plenty of ammunition for the time being. So they're ready for whatever the Zulus might bring them next. Now, at this point in the battle, everyone was utterly exhausted, and morale was kept high. To a certain extent, it can be said for the British, it was a case of you had no choice but for morale to be high. There was nowhere to run to, they literally had their backs against a wall. So it was fight or die. It's the fact that the Zulus continue to fight at this point. It's dark now. They don't normally fight after dark. Their initial assault has failed. They've already lost hundreds of warriors, and yet they're continuing because they think that they've probably got the advantage. They think they've nearly broken the British. You know, the hospital's fallen, it's like in flames. The British have retreated back to a really tiny area, and they're now looking at them and thinking, we must be on the cusp of victory. What I don't realise is they're still trying to attack a dangerous animal, trapped in there that they may be, but as Chetsway have said, you put your face into the cave of a tiger or a wild animal, and you will get your face clawed. And the remaining Zulus are going to find that out, no doubt, over the next few turns of gameplay. So this is phase 2 of the battle, the second assault, effectively, and we'll see how it goes. The Ndoloko regiment charges in. They have to take a slightly diagonal approach to avoid the rough terrain and to get themselves right up to the front. One unit manages to make contact and the other doesn't quite. There's some reaction fire going on over here, and I've allowed reaction fire over here even though that the unit doesn't make contact, because anybody who doesn't do reaction fire will get to fire at the end of the British turn anyway. The Zulus both take significant casualties, but this one, because it's taking casualties from reaction fire, it doesn't have to take a pinning test because their blood's up and they're charging in. But now we resolve the melee, and of course they're going to resolve that melee at a disadvantage because they've just lost some men on the way in. So what we end up with, this 16-man unit is now been reduced to 11 men, so 11 dice, while the British have got 12 dice for the 3 bases, plus 1 more for the NCO. So they've got a slight dice advantage, but of course the main advantage for the British is that they are going to be defending their position, so they only need to roll 1 dice per kill, whereas the Zulus need to roll 2 dice per kill. So let's resolve that melee. Let's see how many the Zulus managed to do. 1, 2, 3. So they need 2 hits to cause a kill. So that's only going to cause 1 kill against the British. So I'll remove them. So I'll put 1 dice down over here off the outshot, just so I can remember how many they've killed. And now the British get to fire back, or to fight back rather, with their extra reach with their bayonets across the barricades. And of course it's 1 dice per kill for them. Okay, 5s and above. That was a 5. So that's out of that lot, pretty poor really, but they've got 2 kills, enough for them to win the melee. So what will happen is that Zulu regiment will now be thrown back 4 centimetres. In this case he will go back here, because he's going to go behind the next unit. He can't, 4 centimetres, these bases are bigger than 4 centimetres because of the way I've based them. So he's immediately going to get thrown back to there, and we'll pick up a pinned marker. So that was a costly assault there on the barricades, par for the course for the Zulus, unfortunately. And I need to take 1 casualty off the British, and I'll put a marker down for them in a moment. So a pretty disastrous round for the Zulus. They've charged again the barricades, took some more fire on the way in, and then were soundly rebuffed. But the British are picking up casualties, and they're starting to get a little bit thinner on the ground. At some point soon I'm going to be taking some bases off, and the British are going to look very thin then. The attack by the Ndoloko regiment is petering out. They've been both reduced to, they've both been pinned by a British rifle fire. It's not hard to see how they're going to even make contact, let alone have a serious effect, although it is keeping the British occupied over there. The British described themselves as pinned like rats in a hole, but in reality they had a very strong position. It's easy to understand how they might have felt like that, exhaustion, the desperation of the fight, the sheer intensity of the fight, and the thirst would have all made them think that they were in a highly desperate situation, but actually they had a very strong position, and the Zulus fought a lot longer than they would have been expected to. This should have been a very quick rebuff of a foolish assault on a fortified position, but the Zulus kept on fighting well into the dark, which they don't normally do. And that's proving the case here. The repeated Zulu assaults, they're basically throwing men at these barricades, and it's costing a lot of lives for very little gain. The attacks by the Ndoloko on the front barricades, wave after wave, have been hitting them, causing British casualties but being thrown back. This unit has been reduced to effectively one man, so effectively out of the game. They're down to a few handful of men. This is out of the 16-man unit. The way I look at it is there's about 48, 50 figures on a base, but 16 men is the point at which that unit breaks and disappears. The rules judge a tribal unit to be a 16-figure unit, so I'm just taking it that I've got a nice big unit, but when it hits 16 kills, it's off. So this unit will continue to fight. The one that's just out of shot will continue to fight, even though it's down to effectively one kill left. But it's pinned at the moment, so it's not going anywhere. This unit's been thrown back. It's only got 5 hit points, if you want to call it that, before it breaks. Left. Sorry, not 5. It's taken 13 damage. It's got 3 left, but it's pinned, and of course it's still. But it did manage to get to the barricades, and it killed off another British trooper. And now that particular part of the barricade is basically being manned by Ardendorf, Bromhead, and an NCO. That is literally all that's there. So the British are going to have to do a bit of reorganising, try and figure out what to do there. The assault by the Ndolangwe on the front of the biscuit boxes, very costly. They took a lot of fire on the way in. They finally managed to get into the melee, and then did absolutely no impact whatsoever on the British, and were thrown back. And of course now they're pinned and about to take a load of rifle fire in the next turn. So I think that's the end of them, pretty much. However, meanwhile, as you can see, the Umthulwana have managed to get round to the position where they're almost ready to launch their attack on the end of the compound, which is going to give the British a headache, because they're going to have to sort of redistribute their men and try and figure out how they're going to defend, in 3 directions, in effect, if the Zulus manage to get that final assault going. So very interesting, very enjoyable, and so far following historical events relatively closely. No fudging of the roles, I promise. Everything's been done according to the way that I've done the rules. Incidentally, the surgeon rule that I brought in has had absolutely no effect. I haven't managed to save a single British trooper with the surgeon role, which is just ridiculous given the number of casualties they've had. I only had to roll a 6 to save them out, and I haven't been able to do it yet. So to be honest, there's been absolutely no impact whatsoever in this game, just down to poor dice rolling. However, the reaction fire has made a difference. I think without it, so far, the British would have been wiped out long ago. Reaction fire, giving them a chance to fire if the Zulus charge for more than half their move distance, has made a difference. It's given the British a chance in such a tight situation. But it's not over yet. There's, the Ulfluana regiment, which is a veteran unit, so they've got better discipline, less likely to pin, and they're fresh. Well, I say fresh, it's now late evening. They've probably been on the move all day long, so even before they get into the fight, they're probably exhausted, but they haven't taken any casualties yet. So this could be the decisive action for the Zulus, or history could be repeated and it could find itself rebuffed and completely spent. So we'll see. I'm going to do another couple of moves and then I'll come back and I'll tell you what's going on. We're now entering the third and final phase of the battle, the final assault against the kraal at the end of the site next to the storeroom. The Umthulwana regiment have finally managed to manoeuvre themselves in a position where they're ready to attack, but they are going to take some fire first. The Unduloko unit, these have managed to rally, but they can't do anything else. This has managed to get into melee, but to be honest, I don't hold out a lot of hope for it. And over here, into the Oingwe, the young unmarried men, they've just continued to retreat. I think they're pretty much out of it. They're not going to play much more of a role in this game, I think, this battle. They've taken a hell of a beating since the beginning of the game, and they're now falling back. Although this one did manage to rally. You know, this one here, I think he's managed to rally, but I can't see him having much more of an impact. So I'm going to resolve the melees and the fire, play it through, and then I'll come back in a moment and tell you what's happened. Well, the Anglo-Zulu tried to press their final assault, but two units have been, I won't say wiped out, they haven't been wiped out, they've just been reduced to the point at which that unit has broken and disappeared from the table. They've taken 16 casualties, and that's the point at which these units, these bases will be removed. So I wouldn't say wiped out, over half of the unit still exists, but they've taken so many casualties now that what's left has disappeared into the night. You know, you've got wounded men crawling into the bush and dying alone, and you know, men dying of horrible injuries from the 45 caliber bullets from these Martini Henrys. Even the Zulus have a breaking point. So two units have come off, so I'm going to remove those. I only put them down there to show that those two units have been removed. Meanwhile, the veterans of the Umthulwana have come into view and immediately taken fire, and so much for them being veterans, they still managed to pin. However, there are units behind them, so this could still be quite a sticky fight because there's a lot of unhurt soldiers over in this area over here. So we'll see what happens now. The British may have to continue to redistribute some of their soldiers if they're going to be able to stand against this latest assault, but we will see what happens as the fight continues. And it's now getting very late in the night. It's probably going to be about 8 or 9 o'clock, probably about 9 o'clock, so this is like the final assault towards about 10 o'clock, which was when the last major assault on the kraal took place. So the final assault by the Unduloko against the front of the site petered out. All the units were reduced to the point where they were ineffective, and although there's some sporadic gun musketry going on from out in the darkness, no more attacks are coming from the front. That's effectively been seen off. They've left. The British have reorganised themselves, left a few men to guard their rear, and have turned most of their attention to the Zulu Umthulwana regiment, the veterans, who are have managed to break into the kraal, force the British back. The first time that the British have taken significant casualties, they were facing quite insurmountable odds through that kraal, and lost 4 men of 4 figures, which was like quite devastating there, and they got pushed back. But thanks to the presence of Bromhead, they've managed to pass their thanks to the presence of Chard, they've managed to pass their potential pinned test, and they've allowed them to move slightly, to reorganise, and they're basically, this is it. This is the crunch point. If the Zulus manage to push them back here, that's it. The British will have, their perimeter that's been getting smaller and smaller as the battle's gone on, will finally succumb. But saying that, there's a lot of firepower pointing in the direction of the Zulus. They're not going to be receiving fire, but the British have yet to shoot on them this turn, because they've been reorganising. I'm not going to let the British get any shooting in, because they've done that move instead. So it just basically means we're going to have one final round of melee. I think this might be the crunch point. Either the Zulus break in, or they don't, and if they don't, then I can't see how they're going to have enough oomph left in them to do one more attack. But let's play this out and see how it goes. The Uthulawana charge in, meet a hail of fire, and get into melee and just lose, being pushed back, and then a follow-up with, on the British turn, a hail of fire, probably the most effective round of rifle fire in the whole game, that has now meant that both of these units that have just charged in have not only been pushed back but are now pinned. There is still two more units, one of which is completely fresh, that can pass through them, but they're going to move, if they can get there, if they can roll that at the double move, they can move through the units in front of them. Potentially they could make contact, they might not, it depends how high I roll, but they will take reaction fire. So to be honest, I'm although the British are running out of men, they are still dangerous and still doing a lot of damage. It's very hard to see how the Zulus are going to finish this, pull this off. Pretty much all of the other Zulu units, the other regiments, have faded into the night, and although there's some sporadic fire and still some fire coming from the hills, the reality is no one can really see anything anymore. This is really the last throw of the dice for the Zulus to see if they can break through that back wall of the kraal and into the main compound. So we're now down to the last few dice throws of the game, so I thought I'd show these. Basically, these units had gone up, right up to the fight, had gone into a melee, had been pushed back, but the two units behind them had managed to rally and were now able to move again. They've passed through, they've managed to charge up to the barricade. I rolled to see if they could do the extra distance, and they can, but they're going to take reaction fire from the British. So against this unit, we've now got the British are trying to pour as much firepower into this as they can, taking advantage of the height they've got in the loft of the storehouse and men from the redoubt. So against this unit, we've got 3 men from this stand here, 4 in there, 2 NCOs, Chard and Ardendorf. They basically need 5s, and every kill we hit. So they've managed to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 kills, crikey, that's a lot. Plus the 7, that only leaves 2 men left in that unit, so I don't think those Zulus are going to be fighting anything. I'll put these to one side so I can remember that there's 7 there. On this side, the British have managed to get the 4 men from that stand, 2 NCOs and Bromhead. So again, they need 5s. Ooh, got a rogue dice. 1, 2... Not quite as good, but nonetheless, 2 kills. They've already got 12, 14, so 2 makes that's enough. That actually destroys that unit. So I'm going to remove that unit entirely. I'll leave a little red marker. So that unit has basically reached the point where the men don't go on anymore. So what's left of the last few stragglers from that unit have dissipated. So that's a good moment for the British there. When we've taken the casualties off of there, I don't think that's it. That's pretty much the end of the game. The Zulus are not going to win now. They've given it their best shot. They've assaulted. They've been, time after time, I've been able to rally Zulu units, reorganise them in the bush, take them back into the fight, and every time they've been chipping away at the number of British inside, but that advantage of having the defendable position has really helped the British, and the sheer firepower has meant that the British have managed to hang on. I've really enjoyed this game, particularly as I've been able to replicate some of the tactics that took part during the general plan of the attack, and the game itself has gone very historical. The fight originally started around the hospital, started to lap round to the front, reinforcements came into the front of the site, and wave after wave was being repulsed, and eventually the veterans worked their way round to the end and attacked the kraal, and the British have survived. Rorke's drift has held again VCs all around, and a good PR win for the Brits after the disaster the previous day at Ishwandwana. A really enjoyable game. I've enjoyed the changes that I made to the rules, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few seconds. Well, that was a thoroughly enjoyable game. I played it slowly over a couple of days. Obviously it takes a little bit longer when you're filming, but I just took my time. I really wanted to enjoy it, and it played out so well. The small rules changes that I made to the... I mean, I've been using... The basis is the men who would be kings, but to be honest, I'm using this as a starting point. So I've made some house rules, which I told you about at the beginning of the videos, and I do think that they work pretty well. The introduction of a surgeon rule really had very little impact. I finally managed to save a couple of wounded men towards the end of the game, but to be honest, the dice rolling was so ridiculous. I only had to roll a 6 to save a figure, and I think out of that entire battle I only managed to save 2 British casualties in the end. Just the luck of the dice, I suppose. But you know, I do think it was important for the British, stuck in the position where they were, where they did have access to medical facilities, or limited medical facilities, whereas obviously the Zulus didn't. My favourite change that I made that I think worked really well was the introduction of some reaction fire from the British. So when the Zulus charge more than half their move and make contact, the British have an opportunity to fire. So whether you call that reaction fire or opportunity fire or whatever, same thing. That really did make a difference, because without it the game would have been over in the first assault by the Zulus. It was quite clear that there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to have the size of the forces that I wanted to see on the table, and these rules work at this sort of engagement. So that, including that rule, gave the British much more firepower, and therefore produced a much more realistic result, a more historically accurate result, and for my money produced a much better game, because it meant the game continued. There was assault after assault by the Zulus, throwing themselves against those barricades, and there was more than one occasion when I thought, there's so many Zulus here, this final assault is gonna work, and no, they got thrown back. And you know, it came close so many times. You know, multiple times we had melees that were draws, meaning the Zulus could retreat without being pinned, but nonetheless they'd come just that close enough to win, and not quite enough. So it worked really well. And like I say, I tried to stick the Zulu assault based on the attacks that took place on the day. So therefore, you know, where my units came in and where they were going to attack was predetermined, and basically they were just going to go full out assault. That was my little homage to the Mr. Babbage rules in the book there. Basically that was it, full out assault was, so I didn't really need to think about what the Zulus' tactics were, other than where they were going to come on and aim themselves at. And it worked out really well. I think we ended up with a game that played very like the history. Obviously it ended up with a historical result, but really right up to the end could have gone either way. There was more than one occasion when I thought, if the Zulus get inside those barricades, that's it, it's all over. So particularly towards the end, with the veterans coming in towards the corral, there was now so few British inside, and they were so limited, so penned in their position. It was both an advantage to them and a disadvantage, because they couldn't bring more men in to fight in the melee. But they clung on those last few dice rolls, and finally the veterans were repulsed and had taken so much of a battering, there was absolutely no chance that they were going to be able to launch an effective attack again. So that's it, I've called it over. You know, the last assault historically was about 10 AM. There was the occasional attack by individuals and firing going on all night. There was a lot of gunfire. Zulus hiding behind some of the barricades that weren't being held by the British would loose off a couple of shots and things like that. But basically it petered off after that, and the last shots were fired about 4 AM. And aside from the rear guard that was seen the next morning, that was pretty much it. When the sun finally came up, all the British had around them were hundreds of dead Zulus, and they were finding bodies for weeks, months afterwards. You know, the death toll, the butcher's bill for the Zulus was horrendous, which is why Cetshwayo told his generals, don't cross the river, don't attack British strong points. He wasn't a fool. He knew what he was talking about. Unfortunately, the Zulus on this particular day got a little bit carried away, and they paid the price for it. A horrendous butcher's bill. A thoroughly enjoyable game. I really do like the Men of Would-Be Kings, but as I say, I use it as a starter, a primer. I will add in little rules or whatever. The rules I introduced for this game made the rule set work for this particular scenario. Obviously it's designed for bigger units and so on. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think that went really well. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Hopefully there will be some more Zulu War games at some point down the line. A little bit more planning, maybe some rebasing of some of my figures, or at least making up some new figures. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and as always, if you did, please leave some comments below. Obviously consider liking and subscribing my channel. So until next time, keep playing. I hope you're getting some solo games, even if you can't get anything else in, and of course keep rolling high.